Jacob never planned to sleep there. He wasn't chasing dreams, he was running from disaster. The sun had gone down on the worst day of his life. He had lied to his father, stolen from his brother, shattered his family, and now he was out in the wilderness with nothing but a stone under his head and a guilt heavier than his backpack. There were no warm blankets, no roof, no peace, just shadows, regret, and the aching silence of knowing you messed everything up. That kind of sleep doesn't come easy. But somehow, under the stars, in the middle of nowhere, Jacob drifted off. And what happened next would shape the rest of his story. Because sometimes God doesn't wait for you to clean yourself up before he shows up. Sometimes he speaks while you're still covered in dust, curled up in fear and barely hanging on. The dream wasn't subtle. It wasn't gentle. It was a shock to the soul. Jacob saw a ladder, or more like a staircase, stretching from the earth all the way up to heaven. Angels were going up and down like messengers on a divine mission. And at the top, God stood. Not a distant thought, not a clouded memory from childhood prayers, but the living, present God. And he spoke directly to Jacob. He didn't say, "You failure," or "I warned you." He didn't shame him or ignore him. He said, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I am with you." In that moment, Jacob met a different kind of God than the one he feared. Not just a God of rules and consequences, but a God who shows up in the dark, speaks through dreams, and finds you when you're lost. That night changed everything. God promised Jacob a future, a family, a land, a purpose. But most importantly, he promised his presence. "I will never leave you," God said. That's all Jacob had. No tent, no food, no plan, but now he had a promise. And sometimes that's more than enough. When he woke up, Jacob was shaken. He didn't brush it off as just a weird dream. He knew he had just encountered something sacred. "Surely the Lord is in this place," he said, "and I didn't know it." That's the kind of moment that can haunt you in the best way. The realization that God was always there, you just weren't paying attention. That he didn't wait for the temple or the altar or the priest. He showed up right in the wilderness. Right where you collapsed. Jacob didn't leave that place the same. He took the stone he had slept on and turned it into a pillar, a memorial, a marker of mercy. He called the place Bethel, which means house of God. Not because it looked holy, but because God had been there. That's what a true encounter does. It turns ordinary places into sacred ones. It turns regrets into altars. And Jacob, the runner, the trickster, the one who took what wasn't his, he was now the man who had been seen, spoken to, and sent forward with a divine promise. That's what God does in the dark. He doesn't just speak, he rebuilds. What's wild is that Jacob didn't even ask for this dream. He didn't pray for it. He wasn't fasting or seeking. He was just running, broken, exhausted. Which means that maybe God's grace isn't always triggered by our faithfulness, but by his goodness. Maybe he meets us not when we're strong, but exactly when we're not. That's what makes this dream so beautiful. It was unsolicited, undeserved, unexpected. Just like grace. And in a world where we're always taught to earn, prove, strive, this story reminds us that sometimes all you can do is fall asleep in the middle of your mess and wake up to mercy. There's something incredibly personal about the way God spoke to Jacob. He didn't give him a generic word. He spoke into Jacob's deepest fear, abandonment. Think about it. Jacob had left everything. His home, his mother, his identity. And God says, "I am with you. I will watch over you. I will bring you back." It wasn't a vague spiritual promise. It was targeted, tailored, loving. Because God knows what keeps you up at night. He knows what you're afraid of. He knows what you've lost. And when he speaks, it's never random. It's always just what your heart needed to hear. I wonder how many times Jacob replayed that dream in his head in the years to come. When things got rough. When he was tricked by Laban. When he feared for his life. I imagine he closed his eyes and remembered the ladder. The angels. The voice. That sacred moment that reminded him he wasn't forgotten. That's the power of a real encounter with God. It stays with you. It marks you. It gives you something to hold on to when everything else feels shaky. And even if you never see angels again, you walk differently because once heaven touched you. It's easy to think dreams are just dreams. That they're random, meaningless, strange leftovers from the day. But biblically, dreams were often doorways. Messages. Warnings. Invitations. And sometimes, like Jacob, people woke up changed. What if your next dream isn't just your brain firing, but your soul listening? What if there are messages from God waiting to be heard in the quiet of the night? Jacob's story teaches us to pay attention. To listen. To not dismiss the whispers in the dark. Because you never know when that quiet moment might be the beginning of something sacred. Jacob didn't become perfect after that night. He still struggled, still schemed, still wrestled with identity and fear. But the seed had been planted. The encounter had been real. And even when he forgot, it hadn't forgotten him. That's the beauty of divine dreams. They don't require perfection. They don't vanish because you stumble. They stay. They shape. They grow. And sometimes, years later, you find yourself leaning on that one moment when God showed up, just to remember who you really are. And maybe that's why Jacob's dream still speaks to us. Because we know what it's like to feel lost. We know what it's like to lie awake wondering if we've gone too far. We know the ache of guilt and the sting of separation. But Jacob's story whispers hope into all that darkness. It says, even here, God is near. Even when you're running. Even when you're broken. Even when all you have is a rock and some regret. That's when heaven opens. That's when mercy finds you. And maybe tonight, as you lie in your own silence, it's your turn to dream. Jacob's story doesn't end with one dream, it begins there. That ladder wasn't just a symbol of divine presence, it was a bridge between two realities, the broken world Jacob knew, and the kingdom God was quietly building through him. It's strange how God often begins his biggest plans in the most vulnerable moments. Not when we're at our strongest, but when we're lying in the dirt with nothing but regret and a rock. That ladder didn't appear in a temple or during a ceremony or in the middle of a prayer, it appeared in the wilderness. In the middle of Jacob's exile. That's good news for anyone who feels like they're far from holy ground. Maybe the place you feel most lost is the place God chooses to meet you. There's a beautiful mystery in how heaven chose to reveal itself that night. Angels ascending and descending. Constant movement between realms. It wasn't just a show, it was a message. That heaven isn't far. That there's activity in the unseen. That even when it feels like nothing is happening, something is. God is sending, moving, reaching, preparing. Jacob had no idea that while he ran, heaven was organizing redemption. That while he slept, God was speaking destiny over him. You may not see the ladder. You may not see the angels. But that doesn't mean they're not there. Just because it's quiet doesn't mean heaven is still. Sometimes I wonder, what if Jacob had ignored that dream? What if he had woken up and called it nonsense? What if he brushed it off like we often do? But he didn't. He stopped. He listened. He remembered. He built something. And maybe that's the secret, not just to dream but to respond. To mark the moment. To name the place. To build a memory so strong that when life gets heavy again, you can return to that stone and whisper, he was here. Not every dream is divine. But some are. And when they are, you can't afford to walk away unchanged. Jacob's name would one day become Israel. But that process didn't happen overnight. It began in moments like this, when God caught him by surprise. That's how transformation works. Slowly. Softly. In the middle of the night. In the middle of a mistake. In the middle of nowhere. It doesn't come by trying harder but by being found. Jacob didn't become a better man because he willed it. He became a better man because God came close. Because grace wrapped itself around him while he slept. Maybe that's the miracle, not that he saw angels but that he was seen. Can we be honest? Some nights we don't feel like praying. Some nights we don't even have the strength to cry. We just lie there, tired, numb, full of thoughts we don't know how to sort. And maybe that's okay. Maybe those are the nights God loves most. Because you're finally quiet, finally still. And in that stillness he can speak. Jacob didn't plan a spiritual moment. He wasn't performing faith. He just laid down and God showed up. So don't think your silence disqualifies you. Sometimes silence is the doorway to sacred. This isn't just Jacob's story. This is our story. All of us who have messed up and run away and ended up in some kind of wilderness, wondering if God still wants anything to do with us. And then he comes. Not with lightning. Not with shame. But with a ladder. With a voice. With a promise that he is near, even when we don't deserve it. Especially when we don't. Maybe that's what grace looks like. It comes in dreams when you've done nothing to earn them. It speaks kindness when all you've known is chaos. I don't know what your stone pillow looks like right now. Maybe it's anxiety. Maybe it's heartbreak. Maybe it's shame. But even there you're not alone. The same God who met Jacob meets us too, in the silence, in the middle of the mess, with words we didn't even know we needed. I am with you. I will not leave you. That's the kind of sentence that can hold you through the night. That's the kind of voice that becomes a lifeline when everything else feels unstable. And it's still speaking. Even now. So tonight, as you lay your head down, don't worry if your prayers feel small. Don't worry if your thoughts are scattered. Just breathe. Just rest. Just be still. You don't have to reach up to heaven. Heaven has a ladder coming down to you. You don't have to have the right words, sometimes silence is enough. You don't have to be perfect, just willing. And maybe, just maybe, in the middle of your stillness you'll hear him call your name. Not to shame you, not to push you away, but to remind you you're still chosen. And when the morning comes you may not have all the answers. But if you've met him in the night, you'll rise with something better than clarity, you'll rise with peace. With a stone turned into a memory. With the whisper of a voice still ringing in your chest. With a story to carry through the next valley. Because once you've heard him in the dark, you can never unhear it. Once you've seen the ladder, even in your dreams, you know heaven is always closer than you thought. So if this story touched something in you, if Jacob's midnight moment stirred something deep in your soul, just know you're not alone. The same God still speaks, still walks quietly into the night, still turns regret into reminders and stones into sanctuaries. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to fix everything. Just rest. Just listen. And if this brought peace to your night, feel free to stay. This is Midnight Psalms, and we'll be here every night, with stories for the sleepless and grace for the weary. May your next dream be divine.